Our story takes place in the eastern United States in December 2003, as we follow Larry Doc Shepard, a former Navy Corps medic that served in Vietnam. Larry has been retired from active duty for several years and now lives in New Hampshire with his son Larry Jr., who was just killed in the line of duty while in Iraq. Larry travels out to Arlington with his two old Marine buddies from Vietnam, Sal Nealon and Reverend Richard Muller. The men who told Larry about his son's death informed him that his boy died in an ambush on his convoy and fought valiantly to the end and died with his bayonet in his hand. But once Larry's at the base, where his son's body was transported to, the officers are forced to admit to Larry that his son wasn't killed in a convoy ambush, but by some random Iraqi man shooting him in the back of the head while heading to the market to buy sodas for his friends at the American base. Larry is understandably infuriated by this and insists on taking his son back to New Hampshire. Our story ends a few days later with Larry Jr. being buried at home next to his mother. Pros. Steve Carell plays Larry Shepard, and he does a fantastic job. This is actually the first fully dramatic role I've ever seen Steve in, and he crushes it. When you watch the film, you notice that Larry is a fairly browbeaten, nebbishy character. He speaks softly and seems to often defer to others whenever he wants to do something. There's a scene early in the film where Larry asks Sal, "Would you like me to drive?" A very polite way of asking, but you'll note how formal it sounds. He doesn't say, "Hey, how about I drive?" or "I can drive if you'd like." Which is why it really sticks out when he gets so angry with the personnel at the airbase when he finds out how his son really died, or when he shakes his head in refusal at the Lance Corporal who was with his son when he died. When the Corporal says that he was supposed to get the pops that Junior got that day, so he was the one who should have been killed. Larry won't stand for being lied to, but he won't stand for this poor kid blaming himself for what happened to his son. And I especially love Larry's understated humor. At the start of the film, when he reintroduces himself to Sal, Sal asks how long Larry was left in the Navy brig after a stunt he and Richard pulled that Larry took the fall for. Larry says it was 2 years out of a 5-year sentence, thanks to good behavior. Sal reasons that wasn't so bad. Larry replies, "It was pretty bad." And I really do love the moment at the end where Larry reads a letter from his son that had been written for him in the event that Larry Jr. died. And then Larry looks up from the letter and smiles with tears in his eyes. More brilliant work from the always brilliant Steve Carell. Bryan Cranston, who I'll be talking about in the near future when I review 2016's All the Way, plays Sal. Sal's big thing is that he's a troublemaker, who's always been a troublemaker, and will always be a troublemaker. There's an early scene where Sal and the Lance Corporal are talking, and the Corporal comments that he's never heard anyone talk to his Lieutenant Colonel the way Sal does. Sal replies that colonels have never scared him, and this is later backed up by another scene late in the first act where Larry and he are arguing, and Sal remarks that he would have loved to have met the Colonel when he was in the service, because one of them would have been fragged and the other would have been sent to the brig. But you can also tell underneath some of that rebelliousness, there's also an honest desire for camaraderie and meaning. There's another scene where Sal asks Richard, after they listen to an Eminem song, who they both hate, if he feels embarrassed as a black man because of Eminem. Richard replies that he doesn't because Eminem is white. Sal is surprised and then sheepishly comments that he's never really identified as white anyhow. Richard is a little annoyed and asks Sal what race he does identify as. Sal replies he's always identified as green, as in he's only ever identified as military because it's the only culture that ever made complete sense to him. It's the first time we ever see Sal in a position where he's allowing himself to be vulnerable with someone, and it's really poignant. But what more can you expect from a master of his craft like Bryan Cranston? Laurence Fishburne, who I previously talked about in my reviews for Batman v Superman and Man of Steel, plays Richard, who was an absolute hedonist in his Marine days, but is a now devout and unabashed servant of the Lord. I grew up in the church. I went to plenty of Christian rock concerts. I went to a few Christian youth retreats, and I went to church camp in the summers of 2008, 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013, but not 2009 for some reason. So I have known plenty of men like Richard. He talks about how he accepted Jesus into his life after Vietnam because he just felt so lost and confused without the war. He didn't have any purpose in his life, but God gave him a new purpose. Which is why I really love it when he first sees Sal and Larry. They're a reminder of the person he used to be. Someone who slept with hookers.
Sometimes 5 times a day.
Someone who smoked, drank, and abused drugs for his own pleasure. When Larry and Sal arrive in his church and Richard sees them, Laurence plays the scene perfectly. At first he's a little confused at why 2 white men are in his all-black congregation. Then he thinks they look familiar. Then he asks them to introduce themselves under the guise of greeting 2 strangers. Then Sal says they know each other, and you can see Richard just thinking, this has to be a dream. Please, Father, tell me this is just an awful dream. But then he brings them over to his home because they were his friends when he was younger. And when Larry asks Richard to come with him to the base to see his son, he tries to weasel his way out of it because, he has a duty to his church and can't move very well thanks to his Vietnam days, but changes his mind when his wife tells him he needs to protect Larry from Sal's influence. And this is the moment where you can definitely see some of the old Richard from Vietnam start to slip out. Because when he talks to his wife and she tells him that he needs to protect Larry from Sal, the first thing Richard says is, oh yeah, shit always goes sideways when Sal's involved. And that's the first time we ever hear Richard curse in this movie. But it isn't the last. But, of course, he's still the man of God. And while he does shirk away from the man he was when he served, I like the fact that he doesn't feel any kind of shame or embarrassment about serving at all. When the Lance Corporal I mentioned earlier asks if Richard was a Marine, Richard replies, "Oorah. Semper Fi, do or die. How do you think I got this cane?" He's proud of his service, and I think that's especially exemplified by the fact that the only time we see him outside of his preacher's uniform is when we see him in his old Marine uniform, with Sal to present Larry Jr.'s flag to Larry himself at his son's funeral. Another excellent performance from Perry White himself. J. Quinton Johnson, who starred in Richard Linklater's previous film, Everybody Wants Some, plays Lance Corporal Charlie Washington, who was Larry Jr.'s best friend before he died. Charlie mentions in the second act while on a train ride to New Hampshire with Larry Sr., Sal, and Richard, that the reason he joined the Marines was that he just wanted to become a better man. He didn't really feel like he was doing anything with his life, and coming from Oakland, he was used to seeing people die all around him. Huh. Oakland, you say? Fitting that I should talk about this movie after talking about Ryan Coogler for 3 videos straight. But back on Charlie. What I really like is he hints at some survivor's guilt because of what happened with Larry Jr. It was his turn to buy the pops at the market, but Larry said that he'd take care of it. If Charlie had insisted on taking care of it himself, he'd be the one in the casket, and Larry would be on leave, talking to the dad he thought the world of. And one extra detail I like is how his colonel orders Charlie to make sure that Larry Jr. is buried in his uniform and not his graduation suit like his father wants. And when Larry Sr. realizes that Larry Jr.'s old suit won't fit him anymore, Charlie politely suggests that he bury his son in his Marine dress uniform, and Larry agrees. I like how Charlie finds a way to follow his orders without disrespecting a father's wishes. That's actually kind of clever. And I really hope that Quentin keeps getting work out of this. He's a really good actor. Yul Vasquez plays Lieutenant Colonel Willits, a very stern man who cares about respect for the Marine Corps above all else. He tries his hardest to be diplomatic with Larry and realizes there's ultimately nothing he can do to stop him, but he's gonna make damn sure that his Marine is treated like a goddamn Marine and not some, as he puts it, pussy-ass civilian. He has no regard for Larry Sr.'s feelings, but at the same time, he's not going to disrespect him by trying to keep up his lie when the jig is clearly up. When Larry directly asks Charlie how his son died, Charlie looks to Willits, who gives him a look that basically just says, "Go ahead." Yul's character is pretty unlikable, so I just wanted to make sure to appreciate the actor himself for doing such a good job with the character. He's unlikable because the actor perfectly understands the material, and I'd say that's worth respecting. Cons. Look, I know this movie takes place in 2003, where Islamophobia was a little less not okay than it is now. Or maybe it is more okay now. But there's a couple instances where characters refer to people from Iraq as towel heads. And I just cringe at that. I just cringed at it. Like, I understand that some of these guys aren't especially worried about being quote-unquote politically correct, but it feels more gratuitous than it does realistic. Like, could you have dialed it back a little bit, Linklater? Just a little bit? A lot of Sal's comments in general about race actually felt pretty awkward. Again, I understand that part of Sal's character is that he's politically incorrect, but it just feels so bizarre. Like, in one scene, he literally asks Richard why he specifically married a black woman. I know what Richard Linklater and his co-screenwriter, Daryl Ponnickson, are trying to do here, but I just don't think it works, to be honest. It doesn't work. It hurts the movie. It doesn't hurt it badly, but it's really uncomfortable to hear. So, I work at a McDonald's here in Michigan as a cashier. And a couple of days ago, a gentleman walks up to my counter. He's wearing a Vietnam veterans hat. Not uncommon. And then, as he's taking his order, a regular customer of ours walks up to the counter because he just got his drink. Now he's going to wait for his food. And he's wearing his own Vietnam veterans cap. And he spots the guy whose order I'm taking. And when he's done talking, he looks at him dead in the eye, stretches out his hand and says, "God bless you, sir." And they immediately see each other's veterans cap. And that moment of connection between two guys who are presumably strangers, they didn't seem like they knew each other, or that moment of connection between two men who don't know each other, probably won't see each other again, maybe. Or maybe they will see each other again, who knows. Maybe they have seen each other since. But the fact that two complete strangers could connect to each other in such a profound way that just because they were both part of the same conflict, it really inspired me to review this movie. Well, that and the fact that it's a Richard Linklater movie starring Laurence Fishburne, Steve Carell, and Bryan Cranston. Why the hell wouldn't I want to talk about this movie? This is a beautiful film about coming to terms with grief and accepting accepting past things from your past. This is, and I'm not exaggerating here, one of my new favorite films. It's not a perfect film by any means, but it's a movie that just washed over me in a way that I just loved so much. I'm going to give Last Flag Flying a 4 out of 5. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review. And if you did, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. And check out some of my other reviews. I've done reviews for all the films of Zack Snyder and Ryan Coogler, as well as reviews for Hidden Figures, Pitch Perfect, and Baby Driver. If you have anything you'd like to say about my video, either constructive criticism, interest in the film, or compliments from me, leave a comment down below. And stay tuned for my comparison video between Rob Reiner's, LBJ, and HBO's All the Way. Woodstock, out.